session so everyone is aware. There we go. And Matt, oh, and so if anybody wants the recording from this morning, just let us know. We have had success posting these to OneDrive. They're typically too large for us to put any, and we don't have a state site where we can put these, anything of this size, and make it available to the public. So we have been putting them in OneDrive, and then you can request the link, send us an email, we'll send you the link, and you can download it. So with that, Matt, how you doing? Is your team ready to get started?
Yeah, I just did a quick check of the participant list. It looks like everyone is here from the Esri side, and also our users that'll be participating a little later. So we're good to go.
Okay, well, it's kind of, as everybody's well aware now, just please stay on mute. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll have some time, well, we'll leave it up to the presenters of how they'd like to handle questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Everett. And we'll also, we're putting together the presentation slide decks as well from this morning. So we'll provide those over to Everett and he can include those with the recording. Right. So this afternoon we have kind of a unique engagement here where we're actually going to be focusing in on ArcGIS Enterprise deployment and governance. And it'll kind of be a tag team presentation here in the beginning between Phillip and I on an overview of ArcGIS Enterprise and some of the deployment patterns that are out there. And then we're going to have more of a kind of laid back user conversation with Pete Schneider from Ottawa County, Chip Swierenga from state of Michigan, DTMB, and Kyle Clem from the state of Michigan, all who have deployed ArcGIS Enterprise in different ways. And so we have some pre-canned questions that we'll be asking them to facilitate a conversation. And then what we've put together for all of you is actually a survey that we encourage you to take. And I'm going to be posting a link and a QR code in the chat for everyone. So there is a survey 123 link that you can take. We encourage you to take this survey. You can scan the QR code with your phone if you don't want to take it on your computer. And just to provide some feedback for us on ArcGIS Enterprise, and then for you to submit some questions. And we do have Sarah Schrader from our local Gov team here at Esri, who will be moderating those questions coming in from the survey and kind of feeding them to us when we have some opportunities during the conversation a little later on. So while Phillip and I are giving our presentation, feel free to fill out that survey, and then I'll remind everyone again before we switch over to our user conversation. Right. So let's go ahead and get started with our ArcGIS Enterprise overview. Phillip and I will be tag teaming this PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to hand it over to him to get us started, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Matt. So taking a look at our agenda, before diving into the architecture, it's helpful to understand what capabilities ArcGIS Enterprise provides and the benefits that it can bring to your organization. So ArcGIS Enterprise is foundational GIS and really helps to provide the data management, mapping, and visualization and analysis capabilities. With ArcGIS Enterprise, you can create, edit, and share your data, and as desired, make it available to any device, anywhere, at any time. ArcGIS Enterprise runs on your infrastructure, whether in the cloud or on-prem, and can be deployed to support high availability and disaster recovery. Each deployment begins with what is called an ArcGIS-based deployment and can expand modularly to meet additional organizational needs, so it can scale up and out as needed. And this may include support for imagery, real-time big data, or data science workflows. The choice is yours. So we can see from this diagram that there have been many changes to the ArcGIS Server product line as the ArcGIS platform has evolved. So currently, the ArcGIS Enterprise is comprised of 4 software components that are designed to work together. And that's ArcGIS Server, which can be licensed as ArcGIS Server Standard or ArcGIS Server Advanced and configured as the hosting server to your portal. Portal for ArcGIS. ArcGIS Datastore, configured as a relational and tile cache data store, and 2 installations of ArcGIS Web Adapter, 1 installation to traffic your ArcGIS Enterprise portal and another to traffic your hosting server. The base ArcGIS deployment, or simply base deployment, is the minimum software configuration needed to run ArcGIS Enterprise. The base deployment consists of software components we just mentioned. The functionality of the base deployment provides many capabilities, including the ability to map, visualize, and spatially analyze data in any browser, manage, organize, tag, and categorize all your organization's content, publish map services, feature services, and geoprocessing services with content referencing a user-managed data source, such as an enterprise geodatabase or file-based data, such as a geodatabase or shapefile, what have you. Leverage hosted layers to do self-service mapping and analysis. Share and collaborate on data, maps, and apps with members of your organization, as well as other ArcGIS Enterprise deployments and ArcGIS Online. Tell your story through customized applications built using story maps, web app builder, and other configurable web application templates. Use GIS services and custom apps that you build using the ArcGIS API and JavaScript and ArcGIS runtime SDKs, along with the ability to access and utilize a rich collection of Esri provided data, such as information from the Living Atlas. The standard base deployment architecture commonly looks like this. So let's take a moment to look at each component. Starting with the ArcGIS Web Adapter, the ArcGIS Web Adapter is an application that runs in your existing website and forwards requests to your ArcGIS server machines. And some of the benefits of the Web Adapter are that it has the ability to integrate ArcGIS Server with your organization's existing web server. And this happens by including web server in your site, which you can host web applications that use your GIS services. The Web Adapter also provides a single endpoint that distributes incoming requests to the ArcGIS server machines in your site. It makes your ArcGIS server available through your organization's standard website and port. It'll block the ArcGIS Server Administrator Directory and ArcGIS Server Manager from the view of external users. And it'll also prevent ArcGIS desktop users from establishing administrative or publisher connections to ArcGIS Server. So taking a look at Portal for ArcGIS, the ArcGIS Enterprise Portal is a component of the ArcGIS Enterprise that allows you to share maps, scenes, apps, and other geographic information with other people in your organization. The front-end portal is powered by the back-end infrastructure of Portal for ArcGIS. The portal administrator can customize the portal to fit your organization's look and feel. With the ArcGIS Enterprise portal, it'll bring together all the geographic information in your ArcGIS platform, and it shares this throughout your organization. With ArcGIS portal, you can create, save, and share web maps and scenes, create and host web mapping applications, search for GIS content within your organization, create groups and share GIS information with colleagues, share links to GIS apps, share map and layer packages to use in ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Desktop. The ArcGIS Enterprise portal also makes GIS accessible for users of all experience levels and geographic viewers who are designed for those who are just beginning with GIS, while experienced GIS users can connect to the portal from ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Desktop, developer APIs, and other applications. Lastly, we'll take a look at ArcGIS Server. The ArcGIS Server is back-end server component of ArcGIS Enterprise that makes your geographic information available to others in your organization and optionally with anyone with an internet connection. This is accomplished through web services, which allow a powerful server computer to receive and process requests for information sent by other devices. To get started with ArcGIS Server, you'll need to prepare your hardware, software, and data before you can begin publishing services. Then you can use various types of applications to consume your services. The base ArcGIS Enterprise deployment and ArcGIS Server acts in two distinct capabilities. The hosting server that supports overall GIS web infrastructure, and as a general purpose GIS server where services can be published that reference your own data sources, such as geodatabases. Many organizations separate these functions into two distinct ArcGIS server sites to improve performance of their deployment. Each machine in the ArcGIS server site requires a minimum of 8 gig of memory, with potentially more required depending on the number of services published and their usage patterns. And the ArcGIS server can be used in two ways. The primary way is part of an ArcGIS Enterprise deployment, in which the ArcGIS server is federated with an ArcGIS Enterprise portal. This is the deployment that most users use. In this deployment, your geographic data is made available through layers and maps within the portal. And those items can be consumed in a variety of apps, including browser-based apps, native apps on mobile devices with little to no custom development required. The other way is as a standalone deployment in which ArcGIS Server is not federated with an ArcGIS Enterprise portal. So taking a look at the ArcGIS Datastore, ArcGIS Datastore is an application that lets you configure data storage for the hosting server used within your ArcGIS Enterprise portal. If you are not a database expert, ArcGIS Datastore provides you with a convenient setup and configuration experience that creates the following different types of data stores. Configuring the different ArcGIS Datastore types allows you to do the following. Publish hosted feature layers to your portal. Hosted feature layers that rely on relational data store to allow you to more easily share and manage feature data within your portal. And they also provide you with some additional functionality in the portal, such as publishing tile layers and exporting data from them, and adding or deleting fields that are not available through the portal for ArcGIS Server feature services. When you publish hosted feature layers, the source data is copied to the relational data store. You can also extend the ArcGIS data store through the use of the relational data store, which stores your portal's hosted feature layer data, including hosted feature layers created as an output from standard feature analysis tools that run in the portal map viewer or ArcGIS Pro. The tile cache data store, which stores caches of your portal's hosted scene layers. And the spatiotemporal big data store, which archives real-time observational data from our federated ArcGIS GeoEvent server site and locations recorded through ArcGIS Tracker. It also stores the results generated using geoanalytics tools run from the portal map viewer or ArcGIS Pro, and stores missions and locations for ArcGIS mission.
All right. Thanks, Philip, for that overview of Enterprise and the base deployment components. What I want to switch gears towards now is talking about some of the newer concepts that have been introduced in ArcGIS Enterprise from Standalone Server. One of those concepts is the concept of federation. Now, when I say the word federation, what that means is that we're creating a trusted relationship between your portal for ArcGIS software component and the ArcGIS server that's included in your base deployment. And what federation does is it sets up security to be handled not by the ArcGIS server, but by the portal. And why this is important is because Portal for ArcGIS acts as your organization's kind of content management and sharing environment. The user interface for Portal looks just like ArcGIS Online. So if you're familiar with sharing content, creating content within ArcGIS Online through user-based access and group-based access, that's what federation provides in ArcGIS Enterprise. The ability for all of your services and data being hosted in ArcGIS Server to be made available automatically as items in your portal for ArcGIS. So there's no need for you to manually reference those services from ArcGIS Server anymore. Federation will make those available to your users in the portal environment. And this usually occurs automatically when you upgrade to ArcGIS Enterprise, but it can also be done after the fact. So if you have ArcGIS Server sites that you're hosting for various purposes within your organization, you can federate those separately to your enterprise environment as needed and where that makes sense. The next concept that Philip talked to briefly is this concept of a hosting server and using ArcGIS Server as that hosting server. Now, what that provides in your base deployment is a place where you can put hosted content and services. So again, just like ArcGIS Online, where you can publish your data as a hosted service, in which case the data for that service gets moved into the cloud, into ArcGIS Online, the same capability exists within ArcGIS Enterprise through this hosting server. So users are able to publish content to the hosting server in the Datastore, and it acts as that hosted environment. And in many base deployments, the hosting server and the GIS server do double duty. So they're often on the same machine, but oftentimes for agencies that have a lot of use cases for the Datastore and people needing to publish that hosted data into the enterprise environment, we often see them breaking out a separate server to host that hosting environment. Now, the concept of server extensions still exist at the base level within ArcGIS Enterprise, but they're now called server roles. So you have your traditional GIS server, everyone's probably familiar with, your central GIS server. You can also designate it as the hosting server for enterprise. And that's where all your traditional map services, geoprocessing services, and feature services will be published to. We also have the image server role, the geoanalytics server role, the geo event and business analyst server roles to provide specific functionality to expand your enterprise deployment and provide those focused functionality to your users. And so all of these server roles can be federated with your enterprise environment. The other great thing about ArcGIS Enterprise and the base deployment is that it's very easy to bump up your server capacity based on use. So here on the right, you're seeing the base deployment and all the components that Philip talked about earlier, but you can add to a base deployment. So let's say you have a need for an additional server because the amount of services you're publishing to your existing server has gotten too high, or the number of users in your environment is too high for one server to handle. You can federate existing ArcGIS servers or additional ArcGIS server sites to your enterprise deployment through that federation concept that I mentioned earlier. So in this case, we're federating an additional 4-core GIS server for publishing mapping services and making them available to the enterprise. And it makes a lot of sense from a system architecture standpoint to be scalable as needed and to be able to federate different servers to your environment as needed. And that also makes it easier to implement our best practices. One of our big best practices for ArcGIS Enterprise deployment is workload separation. So being able to assign servers to environments as they make sense for certain capabilities. So here, in addition to federating an additional GIS server for mapping, maybe that's for field data collection, that's where your services are stored. You can also federate additional servers. So in this case, maybe we run a lot of geoprocessing services and scripts in our environment. You may want to offload that work to a separate server so that you know that all the geoprocessing in your environment is happening on that server site. And because it's federated with your enterprise, you can still access the content in your portal environment. And that goes the same for any of our other server roles. So here we have an 8-core image server where we're hosting and publishing all of our imagery. If we federate that with our enterprise portal, all those image services automatically become available in the enterprise environment for our users, to use. So when we take a look at ArcGIS Enterprise and the functionality that you'll get from the base deployment, you're really going to get everything that you're used to getting from the traditional ArcGIS server environment. So the ability to publish your map services, your feature services, and other types of services is still there. And you're also able to still publish content from your reference data sources. So file geodatabases, shape files, or if you have enterprise geodatabases. And that can be achieved through the GIS server or also the hosting server capability that exists within Enterprise. But what gets added with ArcGIS Enterprise is the option to provide that self-service mapping. So similar to how people are using ArcGIS Online today, the ability to publish hosted data into the Datastore in ArcGIS Enterprise, especially for folks that don't need access to an enterprise database or shouldn't have access to an enterprise database. They can use that Datastore as a working environment to get their data and analysis results up into the portal. ArcGIS Enterprise also brings additional functionality that you're just not going to get with a standalone server implementation. And this includes a lot of the functionality that currently comes in ArcGIS Online. Things like story maps, the ability to use field maps or ArcGIS solutions like we saw this morning. These are things that you're only able to utilize fully if you implement a full enterprise deployment. So all the web applications that you can build and provide out to users with your data can be achieved through ArcGIS Enterprise. And so we get a lot of questions about why migrate to ArcGIS Enterprise. One of the biggest reasons is that that's where all of our development and innovation is going with our server technology, is into ArcGIS Enterprise. So a lot of the enhancements like field maps and solutions that are coming out in ArcGIS Online will be coming out in ArcGIS Enterprise, and they're just not available for use with the standalone server environment. It's also integrated with the rest of ArcGIS. So just like you can connect ArcGIS Pro to ArcGIS Online to access and stream in services, you can connect ArcGIS Pro to your enterprise environment so your desktop users can have access to the authoritative content from your enterprise. And from a WebGIS perspective, Enterprise provides that complete WebGIS system. It's more than just referencing REST endpoints in your server environment or in your applications. It's the ability to build apps directly in ArcGIS Enterprise using the authoritative data that you're storing there. You also have access to a capability that we call distributed collaboration, where you can collaborate your ArcGIS Enterprise portal with another agency's portal to share authoritative content privately and securely. You can also collaborate with your ArcGIS Online organization. A lot of agencies will implement an enterprise environment for internal use, but they may need to provide open data to their end users. And they don't want to have to worry about scaling their own architecture with ArcGIS Enterprise to handle a the public coming in, a large number of people, being able to scale their infrastructure to support it. So you can use collaboration to send open data from your enterprise into ArcGIS Online, where the data is then stored and scaled up for user need. And then it can be synced on a periodic basis as your data changes. And all that can happen automatically. We also use the named user model in ArcGIS Enterprise, just like you're used to seeing in ArcGIS Online. So the sharing of content and items within ArcGIS Enterprise happens through a named user. And that's how the security is implemented within ArcGIS Enterprise. And another huge advantage to implementing ArcGIS Enterprise is that you can have increased access to WebGIS across your environment. And what I mean by this is that we include an unlimited number of viewer users for anyone that implements ArcGIS Enterprise. So if you were to move from standalone server to ArcGIS Enterprise, you could give every single individual in your organization the ability to view your GIS content at no additional cost. So that exposes the benefit of GIS to more users, so you can see a bigger return on investment in the technology. And then you can also have access to advanced analytics, and this is coming from the additional server roles that exist with Enterprise, the geoanalytics, the raster analytics that you can perform on your data and make those available to your users in ArcGIS. And there are a lot of GIS patterns out there, from Standalone Server all the way to ArcGIS Enterprise, and those just using ArcGIS Online, and any combination thereof. We have a lot of individual agencies now that are still using Standalone Server, and they manually reference content with their ArcGIS Online. Even more are migrating to ArcGIS Enterprise, and you can still have that collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, with ArcGIS Online to send content and make it available to your ArcGIS Online organization while you're using Enterprise. But specifically for our conversation today, we're talking about migrating from standalone ArcGIS Server to an ArcGIS Enterprise deployment that Philip talked about. And many agencies are going through this transition. Some agencies have already made the move and are taking advantage of some of the benefits. So what I want to cover briefly for the next few minutes before we have our conversation is actually some of the migration options that we have for users moving from Standalone Server to ArcGIS Enterprise. You can repurpose your current deployment, you can start from scratch, or you can add an additional base Enterprise deployment to your infrastructure. And so I want to walk through some of these options in more detail to give you an idea of what it will take. So here's just a reference diagram for a traditional standalone server, and afterwards upgrading it to an enterprise deployment and what that looks like. For this particular use case, you'll see in blue, these are infrastructure components that can be reused during the move. So it's not like in this particular case, you need a new server hardware. You can utilize the server hardware that you already have in your base deployment. So let's take a look briefly at these options. So the first option is to repurpose your current deployment. So that involves upgrading your standalone server to the latest version and then using it with the base deployment in ArcGIS Enterprise. So you have your existing standalone environment. So you have ArcGIS Server and a Web Adapter. You'll upgrade that, and then you'll install and configure the remaining components. You can see the Web Adapter and Server here are reused in the base deployment implementation for this option. And this particular option can be used for a single machine or a multi-machine site. And in this case, the hosting server or the ArcGIS server is acting both as the hosting server and GIS server. Doesn't necessarily meet our best practices because we're not getting that workload separation, but for small deployments, that sometimes makes sense. So the benefits of doing it this way are that you can use the same infrastructure that you already have in place. You don't need to republish your services because you're just adding on the additional components of Enterprise. And most importantly to some users is that your URLs don't change. So that saves you time from having to go and update some of those pieces of information. And as I mentioned, this is really more ideal for simple standalone server deployments and not your more complicated environments. Some things to keep in mind with this deployment model is that migrating to Enterprise on your current infrastructure might not be adequate. So you need to evaluate what you're planning on using Enterprise for, and does it make sense to use this option where you're not adding any additional capacity. This option also relies on you doing the configuration and installation manually for those components that you need to add. So that could take a little bit more time and effort on your part. And then future upgrades will require a manual installation. So while it requires less work upfront, it might have some more administrative work down the road. For our second option, and my personal favorite option, is to start from scratch. And that involves creating a completely new base deployment ArcGIS Enterprise. So what does that look like? You have your standalone server environment. And while that environment is running, you install and configure a new base deployment on new hardware. And our licensing does allow you to run those in parallel without additional licensing for up to 6 months. So you would install and configure the base deployment. You would then need to republish your services to the new environment. And then you would take down your standalone ArcGIS server deployment because it is now integrated into the enterprise base deployment. So this option also can be done with a single or multi-machine site. Again, in this case, we're using the hosting server and GIS server on the same machine. The benefit here is that you can run both deployments side by side during a migration. So you don't have to worry about upgrading in place a production system. You can run them side by side and move over the workflows as needed. The benefits here with this option is that you can actually use some automation tools to install and configure and upgrade your base deployment. And that allows you to migrate your services kind of at a more gradual level, which some people might not want to do because it's manual, but it gives you an opportunity to take a look at your environment and see, do I need to have these services out there anymore? Are they being used? And it gives you an opportunity to clean that up. So some considerations for this option. It's great for multi-machine server sites because you're starting with a blank slate that you can add to and migrate your services to. It's good for those custom deployments that might be larger. And then it's also good for organizations that want to be able to use automation tools for the installation and for upgrades. This could also be useful. I know many people are starting to look at the cloud to host their enterprise deployments. And so this type of approach works really well because you can stand up a separate base deployment in the cloud and migrate your services to it as needed and as you're testing it out. So some considerations for this approach. I mentioned before, you're going to have to republish your services to the new environment and the service URLs will change, but it really allows you to get a handle on your future environment and make sure you're only putting things that are actually used and needed in that environment. All right, so option 1 and option 2 I just went through, they really give you the same end result, but in my personal opinion, I like option 2 a little better, just because it allows you to optimize your infrastructure. It forces you to have a thoughtful migration of your services and have a clean start, and then you can automate some of the installation. Now, the last option I'll walk through is it's a little different. It's the ability to add a base deployment of enterprise to your existing infrastructure. And then you add your existing infrastructure or federate it to this new deployment. So in this environment, you have your standalone infrastructure. You're going to upgrade that to the newest versions. Then you're going to stand up a base deployment separately, just like option 2. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to use your standalone server environment as additional capacity for your environment. So here you can see we've moved the blue existing infrastructure into a more federated environment over here in your enterprise. So this will expand the capabilities and functionality that you have within your enterprise using this option. So it creates a true kind of multi-machine enterprise deployment. Your service URLs aren't going to change because that server will stay the same. And then you actually get workload separation in this case because that option will provide a separate server site that you can dedicate to doing specific work for a specific purpose. Now, one thing to note here is that in order to do this, you will need additional GIS server licenses. You may already have them available, you're just not using them. But if you don't, this last option will require you to have additional server licenses to be able to federate those servers. So while it really kind of epitomizes ArcGIS Enterprise best practices that we have for this option, because it does enforce the workload separation, it does require that you add additional infrastructure to your overall GIS implementation, so it doesn't always make sense to do that. So some things to keep in mind before you migrate from standalone to enterprise, you should have a basic knowledge of enterprise and the new kind of terms and concepts that we've introduced today, like federation, the hosting server, the data store. And then you should also understand the security model that comes with ArcGIS Enterprise because it's a little different than standalone server. And then we just went through those 3 options that are most common to migrate to ArcGIS Enterprise. And while there isn't a wrong way to do it out of those 3 options, some of them might fit your specific environment better. And then the last note, just to let you know that Standalone Server is not going to go away. It's going to continue to be supported through its product lifecycle. So for those of you that are still hesitant to move to Enterprise or not ready, you can continue using your Standalone Server. And the last thing I'll end with is that we have a great white paper called Migrating Standalone ArcGIS Server to ArcGIS Enterprise that walks through a lot of what Philip and I talked about today. That's available for download. And so I'll include that link in the slide deck here. All right, so that's what I have for our ArcGIS Enterprise overview presentation. So what I want to transition us next to is our user conversation. So I'll encourage everyone again to take the survey that was posted in the chat to provide your comments and your feedback, and Sarah will be monitoring that feedback as it's coming in. And then we have some kind of pre-canned questions for our users who, let me unshare my screen here and we'll get them connected and make sure their mics are working. All right. Philip, are you there? Just want to test your mic. Maybe. Okay, we'll come back to Philip. Pete, are you there?
I'm here.
Great.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a microphone, and I realized my microphone button was clicked on Teams, but my actual standalone microphone was on. So no, I am here, Matt. Thanks.
Sounds good, Philip. Thanks. And then Chip.
Yep, I'm here, Matt.
Hey, Chip, and Kyle.
Hi, Matt. Yep, I'm here.
Hey, guys. Great. All right. So I will let each of these individuals or these users introduce themselves, just who they are, where they work, and what their role is. And then we'll jump into some questions that we have about their experiences with ArcGIS Enterprise so far. And then we'll kind of intermix that with questions that are coming in from all of you through the survey. So let's start with Pete. If you could introduce yourself for everyone.
Sure. Pete Schneider, Ottawa County GIS, GIS system analyst. And I'm going to be sending a link through the chat here. I made a story map to kind of help support some of my, give some visual aid to anybody who wants to use it. Admittedly, I didn't know what Matt and Philip had in line, and they basically stole all of my thunder with all of their diagrams and the opening stuff. So if it looks redundant, it is redundant for the most part, but there is some terminology to give it, to correlate it or relate it rather to our existing setup. So
that's great, Philip. Or great, Pete. Thanks for the story map. And feel free as we're running through some of the questions, Pete, if you want to share that at any point, feel free to screen share and bring that up. But thank you for sharing with everyone. Chip, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Chip Swierenga. I'm the lead GIS business analyst at the state of Michigan and in charge of coordinating our ArcGIS Enterprise deployments across agencies.
Thanks, Chip. And Kyle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle. I'm the lead GIS administrator for the state's enterprise deployments.
Thanks, Kyle. All right. And then I'll also have Sarah introduce herself because she'll be moderating in the background. So you might hear her interrupt us from time to time. So Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I wish we could be there in person. It would have saved me some time. I wouldn't have had to shovel today. It's snowing, and in true Minnesota form, we got about a 1/4 inch of ice last night first, and then it snowed, and I believe it's headed your way. Hopefully it's not as bad as what we got. But yes, I'll be moderating the questions that you're sending with the survey, so please send those out. and we're getting some already. I did want to take a moment to mention the reason why Esri wanted to have this specific section today is based on user feedback. So Paul McCord and Nathan Fazer and other people brought it up, but Paul and Nathan both reached out to me. Now it's been several months and said, hey, we have questions. A lot of people have questions about this thing called Enterprise. Even other people, I heard something a couple months ago. Somebody said, why do we need a data store? I don't need to buy data. And I get it, right? Esri, we have words, we have names for things. I don't make them up. But does it make sense to you guys? We can't always assume that that we're being as clear as we should be with changes and why we're changing it. So my point is, even with COVID, I'm super excited that the state is graciously hosting this today and hosting this conversation, because this came out of questions from the users. And thank you again to the state folks and our local folks on this, braving the conversation today with this audience. So lastly, send us your questions. If we can't get them answered today, I'm already seeing a bunch of questions here coming in. I think would be great for a follow-up webinar to dive even deeper. So keep that in mind as well. With that, let's kick this off.
Thanks, Sarah. All right. So we'll start off with hopefully it was a simple question for both of our users. And it's really about switching from standalone server to ArcGIS Enterprise. So when you started to think about that switch, what were some of the reasons that your organization or that you decided to upgrade from standalone server to ArcGIS Enterprise? So Pete, if you want to start us off, let us know kind of what your thoughts were in the process. That'd be great.
Sure. So it's going to sound bad, but we never sat down and actually made a conscious decision to move from standalone to ArcGIS Enterprise. It just kind of happened. We had several of the components, and it was I kind of compare it to when you go to an advisor in college and you're like, hey, I got all these credits, what can I major in? And they're like, oh, you're gonna major in GIS. And you're like, okay, let's do it. That's kind of our story, is that we actually had the standalone ArcGIS server with the web adapter, and then we had installed Portal, but we didn't know what to do with it. It just sat there for probably a year and a half or 2 years, and we didn't do anything with it, and we ended up moving it around and stuff for space correlation. But we also had the GeoEvent server extension, now, or at the extension at the time, now server, and the image server extension, now image server. So we had those now server roles as well. And so we basically had a bunch of these components, but it just so happened that we end up having ArcGIS Enterprise for the most part. I think it is important, though, that we are not a true base deployment organization. So I don't want to put out this a fallacy that we are, because we do not have the Datastore installed yet.
Yeah, and that makes sense, Pete. Especially with all the, sounds like you have quite a bit implemented as far as the extensions that were available with standalone server. So it does make sense to take your time during the migration and move over what makes sense at the right time.
And just one last thing to add on there is that in the early advents of like ArcGIS Online and Portal, is that we were leveraging and still are leveraging a third-party web platform, GIS platform, and Esri's products didn't have the feature parity that the other platform offered, and now it does. And so that's realigning some of our thinking, and that was what precipitated leveraging Portal more so in the ArcGIS Enterprise environment, because that feature parity is now there. It's not 100%, but it's getting pretty close.
That's great to hear. So from the state side, I know kind of state GIS implementations can kind of be at a scale a little larger than local sometimes. So Chip, it might not be a decision that was made maybe from a central GIS at the state, but maybe from your users out in the agencies. What was kind of the push to get a move from standalone server to enterprise at the state level?
So I guess I would say, I would confirm certainly that our push towards enterprise was driven by agency requirements. it's immediately evident that moving to web GIS is the way that GIS is being done. So our agency, we've got a host of large base of expert GIS specialists at the state that look to the Center for Shared Solutions as that to really develop the roadmap for how GIS at the state will work. And it drove us to calculate and design our Arc Enterprise deployment. And I mean, if I were to characterize maybe one of the top reasons, one of the biggest requests is unlimited viewers in Arc Enterprise.
Yep, that's a really big plus for organizations that have secure content that they want to share out with their users. And doing it in ArcGIS Online doesn't make sense for a lot of them because viewers aren't free there. It's a hosted SaaS environment. And so us providing that through ArcGIS Enterprise, I think, has opened up the capabilities for a lot more internal data sharing. People are able to see the value of GIS.
Absolutely. I think that agencies see it as a huge win. I mean, even today, even though we've been deploying Arc Enterprise across agencies for over a year now, even today, we're still getting praise from our agencies about that capability for unlimited viewers.
Well, I want to take us back a second to what Sarah was talking about when she introduced herself, and kind of this concept of Esri likes to change names on products quite often, I mean, where it makes sense. And we thought that the shift in capabilities from server to enterprise was big enough to warrant that kind of name change so that we could identify the difference in the capabilities. But we've heard from a lot of users, and Sarah mentioned the Datastore, server versus enterprise, that the terminology can provide some complications when you're thinking about implementing it, or when you're talking to folks about implementing that change. So did either of you, Pete or Chip, run into any issues in either advertising this switch, or even for your understanding of the differences between the two that could have been made easier if we had documented that better?
Sure, I have a perfect example of that scenario. Just to put into context, as we deploy ArcGIS Enterprise to different agencies, we have at least we've got 3 agencies that have their own deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise. But we're also standing up. We have an environment that is intended for all agencies at the state. So an enterprise, ArcGIS Enterprise, and that description is confusing. So we really internally had to decide how do we refer to our enterprise deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise, and how do we communicate that with those agencies that we're onboarding. So we really tend to call it portal now. So State of Michigan portal.
Yeah, so utilizing one of the sub kind of components of enterprise to distinguish it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at a statewide level, you have the enterprise, which is often referred to as like a whole organization, and that's probably why we named it ArcGIS Enterprise. But yeah, I can understand the challenge there. Did you have any challenges, Pete, with the terminology change? Did you call Sarah and ask her what kind of data you could buy in the Datastore?
That was not me. I swear. So of course there's terminology issues. I mean, at this point I don't have terminology issues, but because I took some administration, ArcGIS Enterprise Administration Workflows training back in September. But this is this harkens back to when Philip and Sarah talked to us at Ottawa County last fall and actually broached the topic about doing this panel discussion, was some of the confusion in terminology. So it's not really a personal anecdote so much as I wanted to point out, and I can actually leverage the story map here on the second slide. I don't think I need to share my screen, but on the second slide, the first thing is that you can just go to your My Esri account and download quote unquote ArcGIS Enterprise. And that's suboptimal in my opinion, because that gives off the impression that you're able to install ArcGIS Enterprise, but then you talk to your account rep or training or technical support, and that's not at all what you're downloading or installing. I think that was the chief terminology complaint that I had. But then having gone through training and stuff and worked with technical support is that I think Esri, and feel free to turn off your Esri folks, your monitors here so you don't see the cringe coming here, but just fair warning. But is that there's, because this technical support, as far as I'm concerned, they only consider you a base deployment if you're federated, or excuse me, if you're federated. But you don't have to be federated to be considered a base deployment. So there's a lot of lingo and terminology there that is not exactly congruent across the platforms of Esri training, Esri technical support, and then the account reps. So, and that's part of where my story map was trying to highlight those instances.
Yeah, those are some good challenges to identify, Pete. Thank you for bringing them up. And it makes sense because enterprise deployment as a whole has different pieces and components that you need to make it all work, but there are those additional capabilities which you mentioned, like federation, that add capabilities. Doesn't necessarily prevent you from utilizing enterprise, but just adds additional components to make it easier for you to utilize it. So thank you for that feedback.
So Matt, there's at least, I know that Kyle has at least one example that he's run into with terminology conflict.
What has he got?
Yeah, so there's one Datastore. Since you brought that up earlier, it's a prime one because Datastore is not only termed down or a term used for like hosting services, but also with an ArcGIS server when you're registering a Datastore for like related services and so forth. So when using Datastore can be quite confusing, I guess, on which one you're talking about.
Yeah,
is like the biggest one I noticed.
I mean, even looking to the slides that Philip and I just presented too, we talked about a hosting server, but then we also talked about Datastore. And yeah, those two terminologies can be used kind of at the same time, because you could have your Datastore on your hosting server, or you could have it separately. And so yeah, knowing that distinction where your hosting server for ArcGIS Server can be used to store that service content that you're publishing up like a geodatabase, something you're used to doing with ArcGIS Server on its own. But the Datastore provides that kind of additional, it's almost like I mentioned it in my presentation, just a black box database for data to be hosted and used in your enterprise environment. And the Datastore provides some additional capabilities that you'll just not get if you are referencing data through like your enterprise geodatabase. And that's just because there are some efficiencies that are gained for storing your data directly in the Datastore that enterprise can take advantage of. But yeah, thank you for that feedback.
So Matt, one thing I'll say is that the terminology was never really a roadblock for us. And even today, I would say that we use Esri terminology so fluently at this point. It's relatively natural, but I guess there are just a couple examples where it was a challenge, but we're well beyond that by this point.
Okay, great. Well, I think that hopefully helps some users too who are struggling with some of the same differences. And if I think there are still questions, Sarah, too, that'll be a good webinar topic for later on, is to really dive into some of the distinctions between those terminologies.
Right. And Matt, if I could jump in quick too, a part of this is talking through everything that we're talking through. Well, then what's next? Because there's a lot of people who still would like to take that next step. So how do they get started? How do they do that? So Philip and I, while you guys are talking, we're taking notes furiously because everyone on the call has worked with Esri before. Good news is we have documentation. Bad news is we have a heck of a lot of documentation and it's difficult to find things sometimes, right? So we are taking notes, and based off of these comments, right? And how do we find this stuff in Datastore versus enterprise versus whatever? So one of my tasks is to get some more definitive documentation to send out to this group at a later time to help you more easily get started. So keep it coming. Keep the questions coming. And again, Chip, Kyle, Pete, this is why we asked you to do this. This is not, I'm just going to say, this is not an Esri love fest. We're trying to get to how can we better help you do what you want to do, right? So we really appreciate your honesty in sharing this with all of us today. Back to you, Matt. Sorry.
Thanks, Sarah. So we can switch gears a little bit. I'm curious from the installation and configuration perspective for Enterprise for both of you. How did you go about doing the actual install? So was it a manual install? Did you use some of our automation tools? Because we have some automation tools I mentioned in the slide deck. Just curious how you went about doing the installation. Pete, if you want to kick it off there.
Sure, I just did a manual installation. I did start out with Chef and stuff, but I lost patience and just decided to go with what I know best.
Well, it sounds like because you're not utilizing every aspect of the enterprise deployment, it probably made sense for you to do a manual installation at that point, because the automated tools would have, I don't want to say forced you to install it, but it would have done that for you.
Sure, and on the same point, there's a lot to be learned by installing it manually and being able to step through that. And I'm a big believer in documenting every single step so that when you're doing an upgrade or the installation, you have that to fall back on. So because when you're being stared down the barrel with 180 users, not being able to work on things, especially when you're upgrading, not in parallel, but live, and that having those step-by-step instructions are really handy.
Yep, that makes sense. I think a lot of our users like walking through the components separately so they fully understand what each of the components are. How did you go about doing it at the state level, Kyle or Chip?
So I'll give some context as to the scale of our deployment that should help. So we have 4 ArcGIS Enterprise deployments across 4 agencies, and so each deployment has multiple environments. So it's something on the order of 10 actual installations of Arc Enterprise. So that requires, so we're something on the scale of infrastructure-wise of about 50 servers. We experimented with Chef early on, and we used Enterprise Builder in a development capacity. Enterprise Builder is the simplest of the automated options, but our comfort zone was in manual install, and Kyle, for the most part, installed all of the components manually. But we have, at this point, committed to focusing effort on the automation, PowerShell and Chef for our next big planned deployment. We're going to, as much as possible, automate with PowerShell and Chef.
So it's more about learning the components and the pieces and how they're connected and installed separately, and then once you had that knowledge, being more comfortable in automating it moving forward. Yeah,
in a lot of cases, there are limitations with timelines. Now we recognize that to like any new technology, we've got to allow for time to deploy it, to put it in a test environment, etc. So we did that, and just based on feedback from our server admins, they just felt more comfortable doing it manually, and of course it's equally as successful. And along the way, so these are not all deployments that happen all at once. Every deployment has its challenges, and we are pretty well versed in what those challenges are. So I think now is the time for us to grasp that automation.
So Pete, you mentioned, I think you mentioned you installed, when you did the installation or the upgrade to Enterprise, you were doing it in a kind of a production level environment. So when you did the implementation, it was more of like an in-place upgrade, right?
Yeah, and actually your introduction, the overview, those slides are really well done. I really like those. And the options that you laid out there, the 3 options, I wish I would have seen that a couple years ago. because that laid it out, all the cards on the table, and allows you to make the best decision. Because I've experienced two of those options, and one of those options was by force. So, yeah, I guess we first did the upgrades in place, and we ran into issues with like server CPU and things of that nature. So I don't have your slides in front of me, of course, but one of your options was about building over in Scratch, and essentially building over in Scratch, which sounds really nasty, was a whole lot more comforting once I got into it, because it allowed you to do that in parallel and keep your environment. And then essentially all you need to do is switch over with your web adapters, depending on how your environment is configured. And that allows you, like you said, 6 months to get your system back online. And then you just do a quick cutover, and it made things a whole lot easier. But however, it turns a theoretical upgrade of 2 or 3 hours into a couple weeks at that point. But it's a lot less pressure in those couple weeks.
Yeah, you're not having users knock on your door asking why their services are down or they can't access the data. Did you have a similar experience, Chip, at the state, or were you kind of forced to do, or is there a standard at the state to do like a fresh install in these new types of situations?
Yeah, when we're standing up new infrastructure, so say new virtual servers, it's a fresh install in every instance.
Matt, I will say that we also had I guess a little bit easier because we did have the since we had staging environment of dev, QA, and prod, and we didn't have to I guess update in place or as well, because we were retaining our standalone ArcGIS servers. So we decided to keep those to support AGOL, ArcGIS Online. So that was kind of the nice aspect of ours. We were basically able to do that fresh install.
Okay, so you still have standalone servers that users are utilizing for their existing workflows, and is it the goal to have some of those workflows get moved into the enterprise environment where it makes sense, and then maybe down the line, maybe not even having the need for the standalone servers or federating them with an existing enterprise?
I think right now the plan is, yes, the agencies are working on migrating what they believe is more suited for like internal work. And a lot of the agencies have decided that they're going to, or the model is to have like anything that we'd like to have internally facing. So to be on the enterprise or portal environments, and the kind of external work to go out to ArcGIS Online. So that's kind of like that lined in the sand for the state.
Okay. Yeah, that follows some best practices that we've been talking to a lot of users about. Do you use ArcGIS Online, Pete, at Ottawa County?
Yeah, we're using ArcGIS Online, but we're using it for an external only for public facing capacity only, portal internal. And so that way, I believe Chip made a comment about that with unlimited users, going back to that we utilize it in that fashion, not for unlimited users, but because we had a department-wide goal of trying to implement single sign-on as much as possible. So we're able to authenticate through Windows Active Directory via portal. And we do want to have that for ArcGIS Online as well at some point. But we are using, that's how we distinguish between the two.
Yeah, we usually recommend connecting it to single sign-on with an enterprise. So then that makes it a lot easier to do the administration from like rolling out those unlimited viewers to the organization. So is that what the state's doing as well, hooking up the portals to a single sign-on environment?
Essentially, our single sign-on environment is more complicated as there's more than one user store. But essentially, yes, we do authenticate to a single user store. It's not optimal. Maybe we'll end up talking about that later. It's LDAP authentication. So yeah, it's not single sign-on in relation to between enterprise and AGOL, but it does integrate somewhat into the state single sign-on environment.
Okay. So when both of you kind of did the install, it sounds like, Pete, you might have done all of the install yourself. Did you utilize any of our documentation? Did you utilize any kind of resources outside of your agency, like tech support at Esri or any sort of consultant to help with it, or did you kind of just do it all yourself?
Both. So I did it all myself until things hit the fan, and then I used technical support. I'm sure that echoes a lot of people's experiences, but it's going to harken back to one of the comments I made earlier, and I used a lot of the knowledge base articles. I try to aggregate as much information as I can, and I'll build these documents with, like I said, the screenshots, but also at each step of the way, there'll be links to those knowledge base articles. So I have every piece of information, theoretical information at my fingertips. It's just a matter of me making sure I have my ducks in a row and everything's in proper order. So, but I should state, and I might be getting ahead here a little bit too, is that when I've had to contact technical support, it hasn't been so much on the configuration standpoint or even the installation or upgrade standpoint. It's been more or less trying to combat with the ever-changing needs, the server needs, which is very organization and project specific. So that's kind of kept us on our toes here.
All right. I guess I'll ask a hard question, and maybe it's a hard question for Esri to hear, but it's something that we want to hear about. What were any pain points that you might have run into during the upgrade or the installation that you had to maybe pause or take a step back and say, maybe we installed something wrong, or did we configure something wrong? Was there a lack in our documentation? Like what were a couple pain points during the actual install process for either of you?
And keep in mind, we only have an hour left of this meeting.
Okay. We can definitely take that one, Matt, if you like.
Sure. Why don't you start out, Chip?
We'll let Kyle take that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think where a lot of the pain points are like the extensions or the ones that are not as they're a little bit more specialized. So like maybe some of the like for the DOT side, the roads and highways, we had like roadway reporter was an extension that was difficult to get implemented. GeoVent was easy to figure out how to install, I guess, but the configuration from within, so setting up the kind of like the models of the flow, it was a little bit limited in documentation on that. So that was a little bit difficult. We had to pull in professional services to help with that, get that booted up. And then previously in our first install was that TLS 1.2 headaches and transitioning from 1.1 to 1.2 and having connection issues kind of spawned because of that. So those were kind of the more difficult pain points.
So some of those specialized installations. And are you installing those on kind of separate server or server sites and then federating those with your enterprise?
For like GeoVent, yeah, GeoVent's on its own server. We don't have GeoVent federated, but for instance, like the roads and highways servers for like the event editors and such, those are all federated. So most are. Just GeoVent's the only one that doesn't fall in that category.
Hey, Pete, how about any pain points you specifically ran into during your upgrade process?
Never. I'm being facetious. This is where the bulk of my time, I'm glad we only have an hour because I could go on for 3, I think. But so ultimately for us is that what I've learned is that you really need to keep on top of, it's really easy to get away from the service performance tuning, whether with this pooling and the amount of arc socks that get fired up and things of that nature to make sure that you're so what I'll do for each upgrade now is I will go through every service, and I've actually compared the number of services to other organizations throughout the state. And we have, at the time as of a year ago, we had 159 services on a single machine. And that caused upgrade issues with going from 10.4.1 to 10.5.1, 10.5.1 to 10.6.1. And I anticipate it'll happen again here to go into 10.8.1. So it's keeping on top of that and making sure that you have enough system resources allocated, because it's really easy to publish a service and then just sits out there and doesn't actually get used much at all, and just takes up an arc shot there and your CPU. So you really need to, that's what we've learned, is that you just need to keep on top of that instead of doing it right before the upgrade. Is really a 365-day-a-year job.
Is that something that you take on, or that you put on some of your users that might be publishing the services?
No, so all services get published inside the GIS team, so it narrows down the focus of who's going to be publishing. Really, there's only 3 of us that publish, and so it makes it easy to blame and stuff. But then it also keeps everything more manageable, because we can report when a new service has been published, and we can go through a process to kind of like QA/QC that service to make sure it's optimized for our needs, and that it's not running too many minimum instances or too many maximum instances, things of that nature.
And for you, oh, let me
on that topic,
let me just
but I have a user question. If
ask
you're ready.
Chip a follow-up based on what Pete just said. So Pete mentioned that like keeping track of all these services like falls on the GIS team. Now I'm assuming at the state you're supporting GIS teams in each agency that are probably publishing services. So do you rely on the agencies themselves to monitor their services, what they're using, what they're not, so they make sure that they're not overburdening the system?
Well, we have SLAs in place with the agencies that dictate some of the best practices, and Kyle can speak more to this. He actually holds the best practice sessions with the agency GIS specialists, where he goes over all of those standard fundamentals for the developing and publishing map services that are effective. And Kyle, you can elaborate further on that.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Chip. Yeah, so we pretty much go through anything from going through performance. Like, obviously been really promoting pro publishing lately because of those performance gains there, which are pretty significant. And then your layer draw extents, etc., things like that. We also have been hitting not in our enterprise environment, but in our standalone server environment, we've been hitting that, having several services out there, getting close to that, the cap. So we're having to work through that pain point right now. For those that aren't aware, we've kind of found that to be around 200 to 250 services is where you really start to see issues in your site and need to consider expanding. But what we are kind of doing to mitigate that now is we've got ArcGIS Monitor, and we're going to be using the reports on that to help us determine which services are being hit more than others, which services perhaps haven't been used frequently, and we can go to the agency administrators and discuss with them what course of action should be taken on those, as well as working with the agencies and kind of helping or rely on them to help them submit requests to have services removed if they're no longer being used. It's kind of a team effort overall.
That's great to hear. And it's good to hear that you're utilizing Monitor as well. It's definitely a software component that is a good tie-in to ArcGIS Enterprise to help you monitor that system. Because as Pete was saying, sometimes you just don't know when your server is going to reach capacity and when you're publishing the services, and you just get to that point. And Monitor will help you take a look at your servers, your web adapters, your databases, and see where the pain points might be. So that's great to hear.
So just to talk just briefly while we're on the ArcGIS Monitor topic, so we decided to go a single enterprise ArcGIS Monitor deployment so that we've got some ArcGIS Monitor alerting us to issues across all of our infrastructure. So and even helping us understand licensing deployment. So it's very powerful, and with our dozens of servers that we have in our environment, there's just no other way that we could really effectively monitor all that without using Esri tools for it.
I know, Sarah, you wanted to jump in? Did you have some topics
sure
that our
did.
users are asking about?
Yeah, so this is a question that I've gotten multiple times in conversations with users outside of this meeting, and then somebody did post a question. The question posted today, I don't know that we're going to get to their exact details, but it's a topic I think that's important. Ssl Certs. I'm a former GIS user before coming to Esri. On the technical side of things, if I needed something done for IT, I went to my IT department. I'm not IT. And now that we're looking at ArcGIS Enterprise and all these components that go into this more robust infrastructure, I'm hearing a lot more of our users with questions about Ssl certs, which is not part of the Esri infrastructure directly, right? As Jack Dangerman didn't make Ssl certs, but it's something so necessary. And I feel like I'm hearing a lot of people have pain points with that. And so I want to pose it to the state and Pete. You know, what was that experience like? And it could be things outside of SSL, but it's the certs, the security piece. Did you run into hiccups? If so, you know, how did you work through that? And I guess, Pete, how about I'm going to toss it to Pete first.
Sure. So thankfully, we really haven't run into too much for SSL certs. We've got a very close working relationship with our network, our infrastructure team. And so I was kind of surprised when I saw that question come through that people were having issues. Now, don't get me wrong. When I got into GIS, I did not sign up to try and figure out SSL. So it was like reading Wingdings or some font, you know, for me. It was didn't make a whole lot of sense. But thankfully, we have not run into too many issues as far as that's concerned. But I'm sure we will at some point.
Well, and Pete, and just a question. So at Ottawa County specifically, I mean, I know you guys are kind of adjacent to the IT department, but is that something that, like, if you had a conversation with your IT staff, like it's not you and Shane and others working with the SSL certs, are you able to leverage your IT staff? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we're able to leverage our IT staff, but we're the first line of defense. So we better have our ducks in a row and actually make a concerted effort to figure it out on our own instead of trying to just say, here, this is IT, you figure it out. Because oftentimes you run into things take a lot longer to get done at that point. Things have to move forward. So I've not had a problem publishing and creating our own self-signed certificates and to communicate across servers and stuff. So it's just a matter of remembering when those expire and setting reminders in your calendar so that you don't have expirations.
And have you, a follow-up question for Pete, are you using, digging into the tech side here, folks, hold on, CA certs, what's the, going through a certificate authority? So other than self-signed certificates, and Matt, help me out. Do you know where I'm going with this? There's a self-signed, but then there's the added layer of security with the other type of certificates. Are you using that, Pete, currently?
Yeah, we do use CA certificates. Those come through via our IT, and basically we just do an import on those. They get them all set up and everything, and we just have to do an import.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because I think in conversations that it's the CA certs where I hear people are running into roadblocks. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, how can we best support people through that process? So thank you. And now Chip and Kyle.
Sure. So at the state, with dozens of servers, all kinds of service URLs, we have many SSL certs in place, and many to track for expiration. So we also have staff that focus on SSL certs specifically. For the most part, I would say we don't have issues with SSL certs, but it's always that sliver of circumstances that causes. Kyle can speak much more. So even as of today, we have SSL cert problems. Kyle can talk about that.
Yeah, so I guess we don't really have any, like Chip said, we've I guess got a good handle on the certs, and we do use CA certs as well. But we've got a good handle on it within the actual portal itself. So the communication and servers being happy amongst themselves. It's just working with GeoVent specifically and Verizon. We've had some issues. I I guess, having them be able to communicate and complete that handshake across specifically across the GeoVent port. So we're actually currently working through that right now, and I believe we've pretty much come to the solution on it. We've just got to do some testing, but yeah, so that's been our hurdle so far.
Yeah, that particular situation, it's very complicated when you're dealing with, say, an outside vendor, that particularly a large vendor like Verizon, and the troubleshooting, the back and forth. We're at least at 9 months on this one, so it's been a while.
Any other questions related to that one, Sarah?
I was going to follow up. So with SSL certs in that vein, just for everybody on the call, and because this is recorded, something that Esri and our teams are trying to figure out how best to support you, because since those components are not part of what we create and maintain, we have documentation, ... It's not probably going to give you the level of detail. I know it's not giving the level of detail that a lot of our users are looking for. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to help you get there. And I think part of it is this. Michigan has a strong users group, right? So reach out to your peers. How did you do this? Talk with your IT staff. Use our documentation. If you need help beyond that, that's when we probably have to look at some professional services support. And I'm just putting that out there because things like Ssl Certs, it's not within our platform, so there's only so much that we could do with documentation. That said, we're always looking to improve it.
So I have a question that I want to ask Kyle about this. You know, he, on the state of Michigan side, he's been on the phone with Esri support regarding Ssl Certs and this very issue with GeoEvent. I just want to ask Kyle how he would characterize Esri support response to Ssl certificate questions.
Yeah, so Chip, I'd say honestly the support's been pretty good. Obviously, it's I guess Sarah, like you said, it's probably they do kind of it is reliant more on it's like a back and forth. So like being that it's not the strong suit or not within your platform, it's not an easy one to work through. It's kind of required getting the tech support on the call along with us, and then as well as the vendor that we're working with, Verizon, to try to work through that. So it's been a coordinated effort, and it's also not an easy one to troubleshoot at times because, of course, it's when the certs on our end kind of come up as valid, it's very hard to determine if it's actually the cert that's causing the problem. So that's been my experience anyways.
An excellent point, Chip. Tech support, Esri tech support. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you, Kyle, for the additional feedback. So to kind of summarize part of this too, it's we don't want it to be a roadblock for anybody, but it's definitely a consideration. So as you're looking at moving forward, if you yourself, you're a me and you don't know anything about IT, that is perfectly fine. But just know that there will be those considerations when you're looking at this, making this jump to enterprise. So then you can start looking into the documentation and working with IT and see what that progress looks like for you and the agency.
And I see some chat going on too about recommended tool for tracking certs. I know Pete mentioned he uses just calendar reminders for his. I think he posted another tool too that you could use. What do you use at the state, Chip, to track that?
Do we know the answer to that, Kyle? Because tracking certs falls outside of the expertise of myself or Kyle. There is a mechanism. I know there's an enterprise mechanism for it, and even within our division, we may have some tool for that, but I'm not clear on what that is. I do know it works though.
That's good. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit back to the base deployment of Enterprise. I know Pete's talked a little bit about that and how he might not be utilizing all kind of the 4 components that Philip talked about in the presentation. So I'm curious, Pete, if you can confirm what pieces of the base deployment you're using, if you're using all of them or a couple of them. And then for Chip and Kyle at the state, are all of your deployments using all the components? Have they always used all the components, or did you kind of implement different pieces at different times? We can start with Pete.
Sure. So I'm going to reference my story map, and on slide 5, I kind of cover that. So we have the hosting server, or ArcGIS server, whichever you want to call it, and I have the names of our servers so you can compare that to our current network diagram, so you can see it in a county level or local government kind of flavor. And we're also using Portal. We have web adapters for both of those. Going to an external server, which is called ArcGIS Web, which is on the network diagram. And then we have the server roles, or formerly the extensions I mentioned earlier, the Geo Event Server and Image Server.
Okay, great. And so those are you using Federation for those into the base deployment?
We are not federated either.
Okay.
Federation has always scared me.
Yep, and that's understandable because it does take over the security of the ArcGIS server. So there's a lot of considerations that take in place for how those servers are currently being utilized. So, yep.
We do have some future plans or hopes. I'm not sure which one what term you want to use, but to federate and also use the data store. We have intentions on utilizing that stuff. It was more or less going back to the initial question, is that we didn't just all of a sudden stand up a base deployment. It was, we had all the pieces, most of the pieces here, and we've just kind of evolved into Enterprise.
And Pete, I have a follow-up for, and you maybe kind of answered it already, but regarding the data store, was there any other specific reason why you chose not to implement it now? And just add, if it was a need, like, we don't need it because of X, Y, and Z.
Well, initially, so I didn't answer this question, but initially we didn't. And it kind of goes to one of your questions, like, why do I need a data store? Do I have to buy data, or whatever that question was, is that we didn't see the need for it because we were hosting everything through our Enterprise Geo database, and we were going to consume that via Portal. So why did we need to host anything in Portal? Now, this is pre some of the add-ons, I guess you'd call. So, for example, Tracker for ArcGIS or and stuff like that. And this is pre-dashboards as well. And now we're starting to leverage Portal internally, especially post COVID-19, the amount of internal dashboards that we need to support, that all of a sudden there is a potential need for us to be able to utilize hosting data inside of our Portal as opposed to inside of our Enterprise Geo database. But that just really wasn't there. And maybe it was from lack of understanding a couple of years ago, because that's entirely possible as well. That we just never went with it. So
thank you. And I'm going to follow up again with Pete. So looking at your enterprise database and a data store, I'm going to ask you a question. I have answers I've heard from other folks, but I want to ask you the question. Like, why would you maybe want to use your data store and not have people try and put their data in your enterprise database?
Because I don't like people putting their data in my enterprise database.
Right. Thank you, Pete, for playing along, because, right. And junk drawer comes to mind. Your enterprise database is this beautiful, shiny thing that you maintain, and it's really robust, and there's very specific purposes why we use that and workflows that are connected. I like to think of a data store as a great option to store data. It doesn't have to be junk, but to store data that doesn't necessarily belong in the enterprise database. A good example for folks to ponder is anytime you're working through models or scripts and there's multiple steps in those processes that you're running, those intermediate data layers that might get created, you're buffering, you're clipping, you're doing different things. Are those intermediate data layers actually needing to persist when that process is done? If yes, great. If not, if they're more temporary, well, those are workflows that we could tie into the data store. And so it's still managing your data, but it's outside of your enterprise database, where it's really where your primary data sets are stored. So is that does that seem to ring true, Pete, for what you guys are seeing at the county?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in my almost 7 years here, I've put a lot of time into performance tuning our enterprise geodatabases, and to the point where I'm really happy with them right now. And I don't really want people messing around, putting things in there that we don't need. And you know, because I mean, I even get down to, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here. You know, I deal with fragmentation states of the database and things of that nature, and compressions and stuff. And if the data doesn't need to be, if it's just static data and it's not being updated, I can find a better spot for that. You know, and plus with the data store, and this is gonna probably jumping ahead for Matt here, but getting to one of the other data stores, the spatiotemporal, is that because like spatiotemporal, correct me if I'm wrong, is a NoSQL backend, correct?
I actually don't know that one off the top of my head, Pete.
I think it's a NoSQL backend, so those data stores are going to be, for certain uses, are going to be infinitely faster, and because of the way the data is going to be structured inside of them, and they're going to make more sense for some of that data instead of having it in an enterprise geodatabase like SQL Server or Oracle.
So yes, I think part of my point in bringing that up is just in conversation that we don't want anybody to feel like this is the one perfect way to do this and everybody must implement it this way. There's considerations. So things that Pete just talked through, you know, is it temporary data? Is it permanent? They want to manage that data in different locations effectively based on, you know, based on that data. So hopefully that helps you think about your own organization and workflows and data and where those resources should live.
So
one, do you mind if I add one quick little thing? Is that as younger people come into GIS, they're going to be more adept at wanting to use things like the data store because they're going to be able to put their data into there. And we've got users that are sick of trying to house that in their general network structure and things of that nature. And putting it inside of a data store would allow them to do the analysis and that work that Sarah alluded to without them having to muddy the water, because they don't understand an enterprise geodatabase. And they don't really care about the back end of that because that's not their role. But it would be nice to give them this might be a bad term, but a sandbox to play in, so to speak.
That's fair.
Yeah,
And
so
Chip,
Sarah, I think it would be useful if we give an example on the state side of why data store is important to us and where it shines. And I know Kyle has some examples of that scenario.
Yeah, so hosted data honestly is probably some of the best for, like, if you're for any, I guess, temporary projects or things that don't need, we use it for things that don't necessarily need to be tied into other applications. So there's no big, I guess, what we call like big hitting applications. So we have things like such like a PR finder is one of the bigger hitting ones for MDOT and so forth. Those all of that data pretty much resides within the actual database, or I guess SQL database. And then any of the like one-off or quick projects that just need to be kind of done by direction of like a director or something that needs to be done in a faster manner than can go through like a dev QA prod cycle. That's where hosting really does shine. Or basically any of those one-off projects that are just kind of, you need to get in there, you need to do something quick, you need something to be shown to management or things or of that nature.
So for
That
that
makes sense.
reason, at the state, are you kind of implementing a data store just as best practice for implementation for enterprise kind of moving forward?
Yes. Yes. All of our deployments have data store included.
So one of the, I thought of a question that we kind of didn't prep our users for as we were having this conversation. I think it's a pretty simple question, but it might be a question that folks are curious about. I know there was a question in the chat about backups. It was specific to ArcGIS Online, but I did want to talk about ArcGIS Enterprise backups. So with any sort of technology, or there's always a risk of failure at any point in time with any component with any technology. So I guess what types of best practices are you putting in place for backups? I know on the Esri side, we have the WebGIS DR tools to help you kind of take a snapshot in time every once in a while of your enterprise deployments. And I know a lot of users use that, but just curious what kind of workflows you might have in place at Ottawa County or the state for backups to handle any failures that might occur.
Sure. I run monthly backups of ArcGIS Server from the backup utility. And so I have those stored in a separate server for failover and some redundancy. And now I'm drawing a blank here. All of a sudden I got down a wormhole in my head, sorry. So we do backups on the ArcGIS server. And and on our, but I don't do the caches because we run a lot of cache images both. And so what I do with those is, because those can be very large, is I have those stored in a one-time and or like a parcel or street center lines, things that get refreshed, those caches. I'll take manual backups of those. I've tried doing automated ones, and when you start doing like robocopies and X copies and stuff like that, that's very quick inside of the command prompt, but it's also, we run into some issues with having exclusive rights between servers. So it's a lot harder to communicate and get those things to transfer over off those servers in case anything happens. Not to mention just general server snapshots as well from the infrastructure side.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're getting some sort of backup from your system. At the state level, I don't even know how you handle backing up such a large implementation or implementations of enterprise for your agencies.
Well, we actually have a team within DTMB, our IT department, that Chip and I both are in, that handles backups. They're called Enterprise Backup and Recovery, and they actually do that whole snapshots of servers that Pete was talking about. We also have actual SQL backups as well. So for like the SQL servers, we don't necessarily need to do we don't want to do a snapshot of the server, because some data might be lost in a specific database and we don't want to overwrite all the databases. So for that purpose, we do have SQL individual database backups as well. We've had to use, there's been cases where we've had to use both, even in upgrading from say 10.6.1 to 10.7.1, ran into a complication with one of our enterprise deployments, and we've had to do that snapshot, which has come in handy because you can we've been able to go back to prior to the issue, 4 hours before the issue, and essentially have everything back up and running like nothing ever happened. So
like a rollback scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
So you actually have individuals that, like, is that their duty, like their main role or responsibility is to make sure that these backups are taken and ready to kind of get put to use if needed. That's great.
Yeah, and it's a line item on the cost for every server we deploy for that very service.
All right. So I think for our final little section of questions that I have, it's more, I know we've been focusing a lot on the technical aspects of enterprise, the pieces and components that go into it, but a big reason for implementing enterprise is actually so your users can use it. So I have a couple of questions on kind of what are your users utilizing enterprise for currently? Have you heard of any things they're planning on using it for in the future? Just to give everyone on the call here some idea of some of the use cases for using enterprise from the business side. I don't know, Pete, if you want to what kind of things are your users using ArcGIS Enterprise for currently?
So currently, there's the two different ways that we're utilizing it is if GIS, our GIS team is actually building the applications and hosting data, that's going to be done as far as with public health, our COVID-related dashboards. We've got a lot of internal dashboards. I know I mentioned that earlier. Sheriff incidents, some soil erosion permitting applications. We're utilizing the parcel drafter for both our clerk's office and our treasurer's office, but also from an end user standpoint, we don't have very many because there hasn't been a whole lot of users that have been intrigued enough to explore, but mainly in our planning and performance improvement group, that they're the ones willing to share their own maps and build their own maps and apps and stuff. And so they've tried doing different things like Survey 123 or Citizen Problem Reporter and different things like that. So they're experimenting and doing some of those applications, but that's been very limited to select what we'll kind of call them power users almost.
So there are folks within your organization that are starting to do more of the self-service mapping, where you're providing the services with some of the data that they might be able to consume in their apps, but they're the ones that are kind of creating those applications and utilizing it.
Exactly, but one of the drawbacks of that, and this is kind of a local government in a nutshell, is that people have been kind of told that GIS will do this for you, and so GIS still does that for you. Mentality is still very prevalent with a lot of people, and that's fine. So the empowerment perspective is has been difficult to get people engaged to want to build their own when somebody else can build it for them, who already knows the structure, and then they don't have to learn something new, because who wants to learn something new? You know, when you're close to retirement or whatever the situation might be.
Sure.
Not that I have to worry about that.
So how about at the state level, Chip and Kyle? I know you support a variety of state agencies within Michigan, so you don't have to provide examples for all of them, but just kind of at a high level, what are folks using Enterprise for?
Yeah, certainly, Matt. Well, I guess some of the big hitters are like Workflow Manager are being used by both our Chip CSS, which is where Chip and I are part of for the Michigan Geographic Framework, as well as MDOT is using it for their roads and highways editing. We've got sites. I know DNR has been heavily using sites. Survey 123, of course. Quick Capture have been, and then My Stories. And then recently, we just kind of dipped our toes into using Insights. As you know, Matt, you were actually on that for a little bit with Eagle for some COVID work. So we've pretty much, I guess we've got our hands in everything right now.
Yeah, so I can add to that our workflows are expanded, and I think the complexity of the workflows can grow because ArcGIS Enterprise allows for very strong collaboration between our ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. So collaboration is one of the key features and adds a lot of value to the workflows that we have, and gives opportunity to create workflows that wouldn't have existed before.
And when you say collaboration, Chip, are you referring to the distributed collaboration that exists? So the ability to, let's say the DNR has an enterprise and the DOT has an enterprise, and they need to share trail data or something, they can send it back and forth. That's
exactly what I mean. Yeah, the portal, the portal collaboration, that formal connection between ArcGIS Enterprise environments.
So you're doing the portal to portal technical collaboration.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We do also have a portal to ArcGIS Online as well.
Oh, okay.
Are you utilizing that for a specific purpose, like open data, or are you still kind of experimenting with how best to use that online collaboration?
I think right now it's still an experimental stage. I know DNR has been working with that heavily and trying to find out their best way to get some data over there that can be shared publicly. because they don't want to share it, as we previously mentioned. We're trying to keep portals internal for most of the internal work, so they're trying to use that collaboration as a way to take some of that data and bring it out to ArcGIS Online without actually using some of their portal resources.
Yeah, that's a big use case for the collaboration, because you can take advantage of the scalability of ArcGIS Online for those services for sure. You brought up something interesting, Kyle. Let me just finish up this thought, Sarah. That the DNR was planning on using sites, and that's something we never mentioned during the presentation. But for those that might be familiar in ArcGIS Online with the concept of hub and open data sites, that capability exists within Enterprise to build out kind of a website for your enterprise. And is the DNR building that out so like they have a main landing page for their enterprise and their data and their apps, or are they actually building separate sites for different areas of the department so that they can have a specific view into their agency's data?
So they've got sites for specific, I guess, areas within their areas within their department. So like between like forestry or wildlife or etc. And then they've also got sites where you can go on that one and it'll show you all of your the training resources they have available, or like an about portal and so forth. So, and various support sites as well.
So kind of using it to educate the users on how best to utilize the portal and what's available.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Sarah, I won't step over you again.
No, that's exactly where I wanted to go, because yes, the state talked about sites. What the heck does that mean? For Matt, you just described it, that for other folks on the call, when we think about ArcGIS Open Data, formerly known as ArcGIS Open Data, currently known as ArcGIS Hub Basic, the look and feel of those Hub Basic sites in the ArcGIS Online environment look and feel the same in Enterprise Portal. And so I just wanted to hear more about specifically what does that look like on the internal side. So thank you, Kyle, for explaining that. And a quick plug for Ottawa County. They have a really great Hub Basic page on the public facing, where they have a lot of the different web applications. So now that I put that out there, Pete, I don't know if you'd be willing to, if you want to drop a link to that page in the chat for everyone. Maybe, or maybe not.
They're gonna have to go find it themselves.
I know, sorry. No, I was just looking at that the other day. I just thought that was nice, and I've seen other ones across the state. Thank you. But since Ottawa's on participating in this discussion, thanks, Pete.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Pete.
So Matt, we're getting close to the end. What are the questions?
I think we can kind of end the questions there. I want to give Chip or Kyle or Pete an opportunity to add any kind of final comments on their experience, or anything additional they want to add before we wrap things up for the day.
Well, I can say, Matt, that we are looking very much forward to our 10.9 release, and 10.9.1 in particular. And there are a lot of great features and features that are particularly important to me, which one of the pain points that we didn't talk about that we encounter at the state has to do with authentication and portal authentication to the enterprise. Pete said that his agency authenticates with Active Directory, and that's a perfect way to go. The state didn't have the option to do that because of technical complexities in our environment, and we never really landed on exactly the best authentication mode. But we're using what we can for now. But 10.9.1 coming out summer, I suspect, this year, really looks to improve authentication. So from the infrastructure or the IT side of the deployment, we're looking forward to that. Of course, our agencies are looking to huge improvements and all kinds of functionality coming up in 10.9.1.
Great. Thanks, Chip. Kyle, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I guess to add on to what Chip said, we're definitely looking forward to 10.9.1. That's our next that's our next big implementation. We'll be implementing them on all brand new servers. So we'll actually be going through a kind of a similar setup, or we're going to be trying to use that auto, like we're going to use Chef or some sort of automation to get that set up. So we're looking forward to trying that. I also want to let everyone know if anyone has any questions or would like to talk to me about deployment or anything like that, to feel free to reach out to me. I guess I can give my contact information. I don't matter you distributing anything at the end of this, or I can give that contact information, and feel free to reach out to me, and I will get back to you at my earliest convenience.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I can put everyone's email in the slide deck that we send out.
All right, thank you.
Yep. And then Pete, any last comments for the group?
Sure. I think is more or less what our future plans involve, and ideas. Like I said, we would like to, one of the reasons actually the Minneapolis office kind of sold us on federating was because we want to be able to leverage the, I don't know what the technical term is, I looked it up, but I'm going to call it Parcel Fabric 2.0. I don't know what you guys call it. There's nothing on the website which suggests that, but anyway, so that we can leverage that and take the onus off of the users having computer issues and having hardware issues, so that if we can host that and run that through a web feature service, and we can actually have that most of that back end load be put on the server or the database, then that eliminates a lot of the pain points. However, one thing to keep in mind that we brought up with Esri here in, I want to say November, October, whenever it was, is that nobody knows when we're going to be going back into the office. And so right now everybody's kind of existing in this ArcGIS Desktop, ArcGIS Pro VPN world. And neither of those were designed to work efficiently through a VPN. And so we have these ideas that we would like to do, but we don't know how practical they're going to be because of, for example, one of our departments, they may never come back to work because they've seen zero efficiency downgrades from being at home. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to start considering. That's going to be outside of the realm of ArcGIS Enterprise. Just because ArcGIS Enterprise allows for some of this stuff doesn't mean that it's going to be able to be scaled for our exact scenario anymore, because of this landscape has now changed. So, and the other thing is we do run, and I think the state guys mentioned that, Kyle mentioned it too, but we also run Verizon Network Fleet for snowplow tracking. We would like to start putting that data. Right now it just goes into our enterprise geo database. We would like to get that in our spatial temporal big data store somewhere so that's not filling up my databases. So
yeah, there's some great future plans for you, I think, for sharing. All right, so with that, I'll thank our presenters. Thank you, Chip and Kyle and Pete, for taking the time to talk to us today about ArcGIS Enterprise, and thank you everyone for sending in your questions and your comments. It sounds like we did get quite a bit of feedback, Sarah, and it might warrant a specific webinar on Enterprise, kind of on a future date.
Yeah, and you know, we're all working remotely, or a lot of us are working remotely. At the risk of over webinaring everybody, looking at the specific questions that folks are asking and hearing the content and the questions asked today, Esri will be more than happy to have a follow-up webinar on this topic that we can dig even deeper into some of these topics, because it is important. I know that just in my conversations I'm having with people, and I'm sure there's more people having those same questions. So stay tuned. We'll be communicating more information when we get scheduling and timing figured out for a follow-up conversation.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
So that's all we have, Everett, on the Esri side. So I really thank you for inviting us back again this year to do an overview for everyone at the state of Michigan, and thank you all for joining us. And I'll pass it back to Everett to close out the day.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is probably the easiest we've had organizing a meeting, in a long time, since everything was remote. We didn't have to deal with conference rooms, bagels, and projectors. So Matt took this all on and organized all this and brought in the presenters, and we appreciate it very, very much. You and Sarah and Phil and the guys from this morning. I just have to say, it's great to have such a bunch of super smart people who are willing to come and talk and then offer to do more. So I think we're in great shape to take advantage of the technologies, that we've seen today. And for those of you, who just getting started or maybe haven't even thought about these, scenarios in your environment, again, looks like there's going to be opportunities to learn more. I would say, Kyle, for example, if you get a lot of questions, people reaching out, let's schedule something. I would also recommend reaching out to Imagine and MyCamp. I know they're both trying to, promote different GIS activities around the state through webinars, which for the time being. So, if there's a subject matter that they may be willing to take it on and organize it for us too. So again, I just appreciate it very much. I did put my email in the chat. The morning recording came out to 609 meg. I've got it uploaded to a OneDrive site. As soon as I close the recording on this one, it'll probably be about the same size. Again, we've had good success with OneDrive. If you run it, so send me an email. I'll send you the link. You run into issues, let me know. We'll try to figure out something else. PowerPoint decks, feel free to send them my way as a PDF. We'll put them on our website, and you feel free also to put them wherever you'd like and point people at them. And then just to put in a plug for the listserv too. The listserv is way underutilized for folks asking for tech support. It's great for jobs. It's great for the announcements about things that are changing. USGS, Cynthia Rachel's doing a great job of keeping us up to date on some changes at USGS. But I feel it is underutilized for folks just asking a question, trying to get some help. So, keep that in mind as well. There's over 1,300 users on that now. And so, folks out there probably be willing to help, and it may lead to more meetings and things like that. So with that, again, May 6th, next meeting, I'm sure it'll be virtual. Maybe there'll be some topics out of today that we can include in that agenda. We like doing the morning, afternoon break. We can do different themes, and kind of look forward to continuing that, and then we'll see where we're at come August. If maybe we can find a place outdoors to meet in August. So anyway, with that, I'll leave this running for a little bit. If you've got questions, throw them in the chat. That will get saved that way. And everybody have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. And hopefully you're not on the west side of the state and going to get snowed in tonight and tomorrow.
Thanks, Everett.
So thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.